Okay, hello historians. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 12, Part 4. Again, we're in the late 1800s, early 1900s too, a little bit. And we're going to talk about working conditions in the US at the time. So again, going back to those laissez-faire economic practices, the government is not going to get involved either way to prevent one's people from becoming very wealthy. And it's also not going to interfere when it sees many impoverished people living in the country. So there were pros to laissez-faire economics. It did increase rapid industrialization. It caused dramatic innovation to take place, new technology, new machines for farmers, for industries. And there was an improved standard of living for some Americans, typically people who were born here, not for immigrants, African Americans. Things were getting better, but certainly not what they should have been. Cons to laissez-faire economics, we've talked about a little bit, and they include poor working conditions, unsafe, unhealthy working conditions, especially in factories and mines. Dull, repetitive work tasks created boredom and therefore a lack of motivation at work. Child labor, that was a thing, and those laws did not occur, preventing children from working until well into the 1900s. And then finally, this uneven division of income. We talked about that a little bit. It's around today. And what this did is it created resentment between workers and the employer. Let's keep going. Okay, we need to talk right now about deflation too, because this occurred in the late 1800s. Deflation is when a rise in the value of money leads to a decrease in the cost of goods and services. Pros and cons to this really as well. It can sound good. You get to pay less for something that you want to buy. But if you look at this spiral here, it kind of describes what happens. So there'll be a lower price for goods, which might seem cool at first. But this will lead to a smaller income for companies. They're not going to be making as much money. This will create a reduction in production, and that will cause layoffs. Nobody new is going to be hired to replace them when people, for example, may retire. Increase unemployment rates. Then, when people aren't working, they're out of paychecks or they're making less, they're going to spend less buying things, especially things that don't really, quote, need. This is going to end in a surplus, an oversupply of goods and services. A surplus is going to result in lower prices. So you can see how deflation, if it goes on too long, it can ultimately be harmful for society. Okay, in the book we begin to define what a union is. A labor union, trade union today. It's defined as an organized group of workers who unite to make decisions about conditions affecting their work and their work lives. Labor unions strive to bring economic justice to the workplace and social justice to our nation. I should point out that most of what I talk about today is straight. It can be found in your book. This definition actually comes from a different website, which you can check on if you click the visual here. Okay, so when you're thinking about unions at the time, there were basically two different kinds of workers. You had the workers who had some special education, special training. They were machinists, iron molders, stone cutters, printers. The craft workers, because they had the special training, they did receive higher wages and better treatment, better work conditions. Common laborers, as they were called, they had very few skills, received very poor treatment, lower wages, but oftentimes they were working more hours than the craft workers. Businesses historically have opposed unions, and especially at the time. Some of the visuals here, this one I did find on the website. It's pretty famous photograph of miners in the late 1800s. I mean, can you imagine working in that hole every day? You have the children at work, and then you have those taking to the streets saying, no more. Why did leaders not like unions? Well, they felt that unions were conspiracies that interfere with property rights and production. Unions have been called un-American. Leaders understood that even though maybe they did not like unions, to some degree, they had to negotiate, they had to deal with them because they needed workers if they were going to make money themselves, if they were going to have companies. So, in order to fight back against the unions, there were different tactics that would be used. One was called a lockout. This is when a company would do just that, lock out its employees so that they could not come to work and they could not earn any money that day. These industrial unions were especially disliked because they were just stronger. They united all of the workers throughout the country in any particular industry. If you look down here in green, the government's relationship towards business shifted towards policies that actually supported business owners. Even state militias, federal troops at some points were sent in to fire upon and break up strikes. And this is simply contrary to laissez-faire concepts. Remember, laissez-faire says, well, the government's not going to step in. At the time, when the government would step in, there was always more benefit for business and big business owners. Okay, so at the time in the US, definitely in Europe, this idea of Marxism became popular. Marxism simply are the ideas of the philosopher Karl Marx. Marx believed that workers would eventually revolt, seize control of factories, overthrow the government even, and lead to communism. This freaked Americans out. Americans wanted their capitalism. The fear of communism was real. I think to some degree, it's not as real today, but that fear is a part of our entire history. And this fear of communism, it led people to dislike unions, have a bad taste regarding unions. An anarchist down here, I have this. I think this one is on your test. This is someone who believes that society simply does not need any kind of government leadership in any regard. Interesting people to talk to, anarchists. Okay, so the Great Railroad Strike, this first one in 1877. This is in West Virginia. What happened is this company, the Baltimore and Ohio, it announced that it was cutting wages for the third time. And the workers finally react. They walk off the job and they block the railroad tracks. They stand on the tracks. The trains can't get through without killing them. Railroad workers across the country unite with West Virginia in solidarity, and they walk off the job, and they also start blocking tracks. Angry strikers in some cities, including the fine city of Pittsburgh, they tore up the tracks, blocked rail service, smashed equipment, and things became a little bit violent. So the president of the U.S. at the time, Hayes, he sent in federal troops to assist the militias, the state militias that were already there. By the end of this event in 1877, about 100 people died throughout the country due to the strike and due to the violence that occurred. Okay, and this political cartoon I thought was interesting. This is about it was a railroad strike, the Pullman strike, but same ideas. You see these railroad workers simply being crushed by high rent, making, little wages, and then you see the railroad owner himself, big and happy. Okay, some more scenes from that strike. You can see here the railroad all torn up. Down here, you can see the equipment that has been hurt. This visual I just think is amazing. This one down here is actually from Pittsburgh. You can see how the town was just destroyed. And Jay Gould, we've talked a lot about him. I thought that newspaper announcement was pretty interesting for you guys since we have talked about Gould before. Okay, the Knights of Labor in 1869 is when they come about. They actually oppose strikes in favor of boycotts and arbitration. Arbitration is when a third party, an outside group, will help workers and employers to reach an agreement. The Knights of Labor, they were different from other unions in that they welcomed women and African Americans, and their goals were equal pay for women. They wanted to end child labor in the U.S. They wanted an 8-hour workday, and they wanted factories to be owned by the workers themselves. Okay, I have a PLT coming in, so I'm going to stop there and I'll finish with another video soon. Thank you for listening, everybody.